Hi there, I'm Robert Hammond. This is part 5 of a series of videos I'm doing on Julian Huxley's book and Essays on Popular Science, and I'm comparing it to his brother's work, Aldous Huxley, in his book A Brave New World. If you haven't seen the other videos, please go back. It'll make more sense then. If not, I'm going to basically continue where I left off. I'm just basically trying to go through the book, highlighted the parts that I think are relevant, and trying to connect it to A Brave New World. Sorry for all the and an R in. I haven't made many videos. This is just my first few I've done, very recently. So it's a bit slapdash amateur kind of thing. But we were discussing biology in Utopia, a chapter that basically Julian Huxley was discussing H.G. Wells's work. His fictional work, saying how it could be a real possibility, basically. And we were talking about, he mentioned environment, he referred to education, as environment, and I was trying to make some sense of that. And I spoke briefly, I think, about, the DNA being very pliable. It adapts to environment, it adapts to change, and that's how it can change. That's one explanation for that. But then before that, I was talking about the sexes, because Julian Huxley was talking about the social roles of the sexes, and how I think he was trying to put up the argument: is it a natural thing? Is it a biological thing through evolution that you have these natural roles, just like in the animal kingdom, which I think is most likely the case, or is it a case of how we're raised, how we're reared? Is it a social conditioning? Well, that makes sense if you're going to talk about environment and education, because he was talking about tribes of people where the females, the women, are the dominant, play the dominant social role, and men are more the passive. Is it because they're raised that way? Like if you took a group of girls from very young, you raise them like boys, you encourage them to be physical, play football, be assertive, be aggressive, and then you took a group of boys and you told them to be passive, don't assert yourself, and don't be as physical. You raise them differently. Are they going to grow up as a product of their environment and show no real difference, And I think that's the blurring of the sexes, saying, there's no real natural social role here. But it was Alan Watt, I mentioned him in an introduction I did on another video, just telling a little bit about myself, and he mentioned that, when he was at school, boys used to get itchy feet because when they were hit puberty they got energy, and they would allow the boys to go out and kick a football in the middle of a class, then come back in again, so that they can, exert some energy, and then they can clear their heads and concentrate. Because he was saying, boys are boys, or boys should be boys, and how nowadays we drug them and say they've got ADHD, attention deficit disorder, when, perhaps it's a case of just boys being boys naturally, biologically. So I was mentioning also how that can be seen as a drag. Boys being boys can be seen as a drag. They've got to channel this energy in football, and and all this tribalism that we're talking about. And then we were talking about the tribe being a smaller, the family being a small tribe. So if you change the environment, you get a different individual. So environment and education he was talking about. So reading on from this, and be patient with me, because I'm not very good at my reading is not that good with certain words. So anyway, eugenic change has been restricted to breeding out. Mr. Wells does not initiate us into methods. Certain temperamental qualities, habitual gloomliness, petty inefficiency, excess of that sacrificial pity Mr. Wells dislikes so much, and so forth. The rest has been accomplished by proper education, and above all by a change of heart as regards the essential aims of life. by a proper application of psychology to early life. This is just another section here. So that painful repression and stupid suppression shall not occur, and men and women grow up unridden by hags of sex or fear, and yet without separation of any important fragment of their mental organism from the rest. Education then steps in and enlarges the capacities of this unhampered growing mind, while the substitution of a form of telepathy for speech reduces the time and energy needed for communication. All right, we were talking about social roles, or he mentioned also a change of heart. So if people are re-educated or reprogrammed, then old values can disappear, like superstitions, you might say. For example, sex before marriage. When he's talking about sex here, is he talking about fears of, you mustn't have sex before marriage, you mustn't have children out of wedlock, because that's considered disrespectful. These are maybe old values, and he's bringing in new ones, and hence a change of heart. So where were we? Reading on. Mr. Wells imagines a race has been produced of great beauty and physical strength, great intellectual and artistic capabilities, interest primarily in two things: the understanding of nature for its own sake, and its control for the sake of humanity. By control, Mr. Wells means not only the utilitarian control, but that which, as in a garden, is to please and delight, and that highest control of all, artistic and scientific creation. The utopians, owing to their upbringing and social environment, come to think and act so that they need no central government, no law courts, no police, and no contracts. In this, Mr. Wells is only telling us what we already know, that in most men it seems theoretically possible to produce a change of heart, i.e. substitute new dominant ideas for old, and that if this is effected, restrictive measures gradually become unnecessary. It's really creating the perfect slave, and the idea that we are a product of our environment. So, once the old generations die off, people have new values, new principles, because they're programmed. And you can see that's a fact, isn't it? If any of you've got grandparents who are alive, their views on the world, or at least mine, are quite old. They're very different compared to the next generation. Right. Bear with me. How much time have I got? A few more minutes. Reading on. Another page. Further, that the attributes of living things have almost all been developed in relation to the environments, even their mental attributes. Right. And reading on another page, if the minority become the majority, and this is that's classic eugenics, isn't it? If the minority became the majority, society and all its institutions and codes would be radically altered. Take but one example, and a current one: birth control. When Mr. Wells's father, Emeriton, finds that it is the basis of a utopian civilization, he exclaims in horror, refusing to create souls, the wickedness of it. Oh my God. So he's got old values, old school values about, it's up to the creator who decides who is brought into this world, and whose genetics survive, who lives and dies, So he was saying this seems very unnatural, who are we to decide? And so old school values would say, if life if it's growing in you, if a woman's pregnant, it's not her right to decide whether that life lives or dies. It's in the hands of God. As with Julian Huxley's way of saying, science can decide or people can decide. Well, a scientific dictator, couldn't they, could decide who reproduces and who doesn't. Okay, reading on, just a few more minutes of this. Different section. This is the great enemy of true progress. This belief that things have already been settled for us, and that the consequent results of considering proposals not on their merits, but in reference to a system of principles which is for the most part, a survival from primitive civilizations. So he's saying, values can change. You can, when that old generation dies, he was saying that basically that's the enemy of progress. Yeah, and I think that is the end of Biology Utopia section. I hope that kind of makes sense for you. Again, this is a bit amateur and a bit sketchy. And the next section is called Control of the Life Cycle, which has good implications to A Brave New World. Controlling the life cycle. I think we're going to connect this to controlling the growth of human beings from in the womb, possibly, how long they live, aging, if they age, because in A Brave New World, I don't think people age. That they stay in their prime, and then I think they're programmed to switch off or to suicide or something like that. But people don't grow old. So that's something we can discuss in part 6.